So let me go back up to the stage. I want to key on some areas to highlight. So you never know where you're going to find investors. It's funny, Green Label was, or sorry, Green Label is a good example. DeMar DeRozan was one of their initial investors. I think he's off the cap table now. But high net worth individuals, like friends like that, you never know who can end up writing the check. So Green Street was that big co-working space in LA. It was a bunch of cannabis companies that each had their own offices. They were trying to make it, a little bit like in a startup accelerator. You know how Green Street came to be? The two founders were saying we should build a co-working space, so a big office for cannabis at Soho House. They were there loudly talking about this idea, and the dude at the table next to him turned over and he goes, "Go find the building. I love your idea. I'll put up the money for it." That guy knows at the end of the day he's still going to own the building. So if he has somebody who can go out there and he'll make his money even if it fails. But you see people like this in places like LA that they're opportunists. They're looking for interesting ideas, and some of them are so loose with their money, they'll give it on a very loose plan. Obviously, that's not par for the course. That's not super common. But in this market, in which we've gone through years of everything being structured, everything needing to flow through, different investor networks and different brokers, and it's so structured, I think there's been a real fatigue there. And now the checks that I'm seeing getting written primarily are coming from closer relationships like angels, like friends and family, like family offices who care just as much about the founder as they do about the product or the business model. They're investing in you because they see potential in ways that a lot of these other firms, it's the numbers. The glamour metrics, that's what matters. Everything else is ancillary. While you can gain a lot more ground working with one of these offices that invests based on passion, based on a feeling, based on what they know is right, their set of values, versus based on what's going to generate the highest returns. So at the end of the day, investors are looking to, generally 7, 8, 9, 10x the investment that they're placing into you. That's going to be pretty par for the course, regardless of what type of investor. But we're not going to go through this today, but this is just I want to actually use some real world examples. But here is just kind of a basic breakdown of different slide decks. I really want to make sure that if anybody wants to dig into this later, they have the ability to do so. So if you want to look at the pitch deck and all these different tips, I'm sure we can circulate that after. But there's some really good information here on different pitch events. I was just at Benzinga in Chicago up until yesterday. It was surprisingly chock full of investors in ways that I haven't seen in years. Groups like Poseidon are specifically interested in retail. They've started to write actual checks again. Term sheets are always going to be a little bit wonky if it's a cannabis-specific firm. I think a lot of these guys, the same way if it's a cannabis-specific bank or a cannabis-specific payment processor, you're paying a little bit of a premium. You kind of see the same with these investors. A lot of the terms they're asking for can be, not super favorable, but the way to discern if they are favorable, of course, is to get out there, talk to other investors, get a couple different term sheets, couple different options in front of you, because as I mentioned earlier, they're going to all ask for different things. Merida, one of the most prominent firms in the industry, regardless of the size of check that they write, even if they don't lead the round, even if they're only putting in $400,000 when someone else put in $1 million, they're going to say one of our terms is, I need to be at the very top of the press release saying Merida leads the round into Khalifa Kush or whatever else it is. So these little investors love these as ways to obviously elevate the prominence of their firm, but it's not just a game they're playing, in the space with the startups. They're playing it with the other investors as well. They really want to go out there and appear to be the biggest dog in the room, which allows them to justify those sort of terms. So sometimes the most well-known, I don't want to say best reputation, but maybe they've made the most amount of investments in the space, can be the one you need to have your guard up most around. So, Connor Global, MJ Unpacked, Ease Momentum has been great. I hope they do a fourth cohort of that. But they have a startup accelerator program that gives $50,000 grants. So this is not an investment. It's non-dilutive. It's them just giving you $50,000 to help put towards the success of your company. I really hope they bring this program back. Pitchforce is good. That's up in San Francisco. That's a lot of tech as well, but they do heavy cannabis offshoot. It can be good for getting feedback. It's always a tough decision if you want to do anything that's pay for play. Like, I typically advise against anybody that's, charging the startups for access to investors, but sometimes it can be worth it if there's maybe a there. Like, one of the investors maybe that's on the panel you're pitching to is somebody you've been trying to get in front of. Hey, look, it might be worth the $200 or whatever to do it. But I'll talk about that all day if anyone has any, is that something anyone's actively considering? Crowdfunding has actually worked, especially for small brands and internationally as well. It's funny, you guys are doing a marketplace. There was a marketplace, I think primarily for hemp products and stuff in London and Europe. They put that through a Swedish crowdfunding site and raised $2 million. So you never know. Sometimes these weird other countries and weird crowdfunding platforms can be an answer. Debt has been extremely popular in the last couple of years. I think something like 90% of all deals in retail and cultivation in the past 2 years have been debt, which is insane to say. But that's where we're at, is a lot of the war chests for equity investments have gone dry because they've blown it on big projects that just never came through. So a couple to look at on the crowdfunding side: Steed Invest, Micro Invest. Like I said, a good fit maybe for smaller products. And ask for intros. I'm really big on this. If you've had a friend or somebody has successfully raised money, just ask them, hey, can I talk to that investor as well? Would you mind forwarding my pitch deck along just for their review? Maybe they'll bite on it, maybe they won't. There's a lot of brokers out there, either officially or unofficially, actual certified brokers who've taken the securities exam. A lot of time they're going to charge you to even go out and look on your behalf to try to court investors. If you're an early stage company, 99% of the time that's not going to be the route you want to take. And brokers have the most success if it's something that's already has traction. And they're fishing in a much smaller pond than you going out there trying to take a pre-revenue company to every investor that'll look at it. So yeah, brokers can be tough, but venture scouts are something to look out for. There's a lot of different funds, even smaller family offices and similar, that will tap members of the community to serve as a venture scout. Venture scouts are strictly there to sort through decks, scan through which one has the most promise and bubble it up to the partners to actually review it. So you feel free to cold email them, hit them up on LinkedIn, send them your deck. That's their job, is to start bubbling things up. Like I said, friends and family is tough. Everyone's going to have a different network there, but that does have the highest chance of success in closing a check, as you can imagine, versus other methods. It's something like 60%, I believe, of friends and family projects are funded with at least some friends and family money. A good way to explore this is to just be bold, be posting on social media, documenting your journey. One thing I always recommend is, as you're meeting investors, partners, even if you think you're too early for them or vice versa, get their email and say, hey, do you mind if I keep you in the loop about updates on my project? And a really good practice, what 500 startups, what Y Combinator, what the big startup accelerators will teach you, is to start sending out an email. Maybe monthly, maybe bi-monthly, either way, that just recaps, very short and sweet. I can't emphasize this enough. This doesn't work if it's a massive email that somebody has to take 5 minutes to read. But if you have a couple bullet points on, here's what's happened in the last, since my last update, here's the growth that we've seen, here's a new check we closed, a new partner we have, and then the second part of the email is, what do you need right now? If you make your asks clear and you show that traction, this is the kind of thing investors want to see. They want you BCCing them on an update after you get their permission or they seem interested on how your company is going. they are more likely to start, even if they pass on your deal, to see, oh God, they just landed some big partner. Suddenly you're back up at the top of their queue. They're not going to know about you. They're not going to voluntarily reach out to you, regardless of if they're a family investor or a big VC, unless you're staying in touch. You're hitting them with touch points saying, hey, are you going to be at this conference? I'm going to be there too. Want to show you some of the updates that we've made to our deck. Communication, it's unfortunate that this is the way the game is played, but it has to come from your side. But doing a mass email, a mass update of your progress is one of the easiest ways to keep them on the hook and interested in what you're doing. Okay. Good source of money can often be people who just sold their companies. A lot of times people do not want to continue as operators after they exit. They want to become investors. They want to become angels, use some of their newfound cash to deploy into their friends' projects. So people who just sold their companies, executives at larger companies can be a good fit. I know an early stage genetics company, specifically Old School Landrace Genetics. They were Neville Schoonmaker seeds from Amsterdam. This dude went to, he had some mutual friends in Maryland. One of them was a VP at SiriusXM. And he goes, I loved smoking this weed growing up. How much do you need? He fundraised $500,000 from an executive at SiriusXM just because this guy liked old school weed. You don't know who the investor necessarily is going to be. Celebrities, like I mentioned, DeMar DeRozan earlier. Baron Davis is an investor in the space. It's obviously no one has close relationships with these people for the most part. But look, we're in LA, and at the end of the day, through the extended network, sometime you can actually get to these people in a way that if we were in Michigan, there'd be no chance. So crypto money, believe it or not, a lot of those people who did make a bunch of money in crypto, they love two things in life, which is vacation and making investments. So you can find some of these people who don't want to just hold a bunch of money in their bank. They want to be out there spending it in crypto conferences and stuff like that. Even if they're not quite as in vogue as they were several years ago, they still exist. They're in places like LA, places like Miami. A lot of generic startup events. If it's tech focused or whatever, you want to be in that room. I can't emphasize that enough. I have one rule, that I have is every single week I try to do a different event. I don't care if it's a random, random lawyer's office hour, happy hour thing, or it's, the network show. But every week I want to do something different to meet new people, talk about my idea with new people, because you never know who they're connected to. I've seen many people find investors at Hall of Flowers, which is not an investor event, the same way they have it at Benzinga. So, and one thing you can do is educate other people on why investing in this space makes sense. If you know somebody who's just sold their company, maybe they're an angel investor, maybe there's a family member who's retiring and has some cash to throw around, start to show them some examples of big deals that have been happening in the space, like Boston Beer Company funding Uncle Arnie's. We're seeing big liquor distributors in Tennessee just funded Pedal Fast. By the day, we're starting to see different types of investors, different verticals jumping into the space. And if you are sharing these stories with people who have a lot of money, A, they're going to look to you as an expert, who sees what's going on. But B, yeah, they're good targets. And you can always bootstrap. So I always recommend if you have the ability to scale your company organically and not take a dime in investor money, do it. This investor rat race of having to constantly be hopping on calls with these guys, and it can, needless to say, be worth it if they're giving you the resources you need to scale. But I mean, there's nothing better than just having breathing room and calling your own shots. Friends and family round, like I said, good one at pre-revenue. SPVs can be worth looking at, special purpose vehicles. This allows, for instance, if your average check size or your minimum check size is $50K, you could spin up an SPV and have someone run it, like Helene Servian of J1 or Jen Pyro. A lot of these investors run SPVs to open up a way for smaller check writers to still get access to these deals. So, for instance, I'm an SPV investor in Wonder. Wonder is a beverage company. Their minimum check size was $50K, but they spun up an SPV that allowed check sizes of $5,000 or around that into the deal. So a bunch of people could use that, and then it was a win-win for them because they got a bunch of other investors in on the deal who have different networks, different backgrounds, and obviously those checks have been helpful. There are grants out there, like literally the state of Israel gave $1 million to Day 3 Labs for Parkinson's research about a month ago. There's the NIH grants as well. I work with a R&D company in Michigan that has secured several $100,000. There is environmental groups. I know my friend has a cultivation in Vermont. He's gotten several $100,000 to protect the local watershed, and not pollute that. And let's see, going viral can kill your startup. This is one thing I have on here, and when we share the deck, feel free to click into this. But it's really important to make sure that you're raising enough money that if you suddenly get a rush of interest in your company, you're not going to stall out. You're not going to get over your skis. You're not going to get overextended because you're trying to move into too many markets at once. So a good plan can obviously be to raise 18 months of runway and grow it slow. Some other good resources, obviously Equity Trade Network just pulled off a big NABIS partnership. They had a booth at the California State Fair actually doing on-site product sales. Awesome to see. So if you have a brand, this can be potentially a great partner. Out in New York, our academy has actually more tied in with the state of New York, but they historically have had really great resources. Hillary Yu, of course, is their founder for startups, and of course, Canaclusive. Their accountability list hasn't been, I don't think, updated in a couple of years, but that was a great resource for somebody saying, here's how we can spot good actors and bad actors and why. It's somebody making a public share document for cannabis founders saying, here's a list of all different organizations, different investors. Are these guys, easy to work with? Do they employ social equity people? I mean, just like what, on so many levels, having these watchdogs can be absolutely critical. And we're fortunate to have them in cannabis. You don't get these same sort of organizations in tech or blockchain or whatever. Let's see, obviously the DCRs has a big database as well, holding each other accountable. That's one thing I'm really, really big on. And if there's one takeaway from like everything I'm gonna say today, it's make a little group with other people that are in your same shoes, that are local, that you can hold each other accountable. You can meet like all the big accelerators, 500 startups, whatever. The real value in those comes months and years after, where these founders are still holding each other accountable, still giving each other their updated elevator pitches, still talking each other through how to maintain a work-life balance. Because at the end of the day, like there's nothing more difficult than going out there and building your own startup. And if I have countless examples. I came out here from Michigan years ago of friends who came out and they're like, oh, I'm doing my startup. I'm following Elon Musk. Oh, I'm only sleeping 4 days a night. I don't have a girlfriend. And I'd be like, hey, come out to a movie with me or come out to this concert. And they'd be like, no way, man, gotta grind. Well, guess who was back in Michigan 6 months later? They were, because they didn't have balance. They weren't making friends. They weren't feeling enriched in their lives. It's so easy to lose sight of that balance as you get deep into your startup, and that can easily lead to your startup failing because you get burnt out. You start taking out your aggression with other partners, with other founders, with anybody else on your team. That can sink you just as easily. So the Revel events are good in New York. CannaGather, like I mentioned, has some digital ones. Hall of Flowers does have social equity grants. Their trade shows have been good. They opened up a consumer day on the second day. And of course, NCIA's DEI community does have a bunch of resources. Roz and M4MM are definitely still at it. I saw them at Benzinga this week. So all of these are worth looking into. Normal is obviously strong in LA as well. Good source of data, Eighth Revolution, Headset, New Frontier where I work. We're always pumping out reports with market data that can be used in your pitch decks. Plenty more. New Cannabis Ventures is really, really good for that like market size information. Same with Green Market Report. But let's break into it. I'm gonna pull up some real world pitch decks. I feel like I got a little bit a little bit down to the weeds into this presentation, but let's start with one that I really like. This deck right here is beautiful. It is comically long. This is the longest deck at 42 slides that I would ever say is a good deck. But I want to show it for one specific reason, which is how well branded it is, how professional this deck looks. You even can see the subtle watermark, right here of their logo, kind of embossing their title slide here. But these guys start off with an exec summary. Not everyone does that. Most people go right into the problem and then the solution. But when you have a deck this long, it can be good to lay out your top points right off the bat to make sure they're not missed. Because naturally, investors spend longer on your early slides than they do on the later slides. And it's up to you to find ways to hook them to, as you get into those later slides with things like hammer drop moments, to keep them engaged. So these guys make it clear they're huge, large scale cultivation. They're trying to be vertically integrated. I mean, and any investor they're pitching has already probably either invested in or at least seen the deck of another vertically integrated operator in Massachusetts. So, like I said, not trying to reinvent the wheel here. Of course, emphasizing delivery, which can be a little bit of a tough going in Massachusetts. So that's kind of their a little bit of their underlying magic is being able to pull off delivery. These guys included like kind of a table of contents, just for quick reference. I don't really recommend this, but I do recommend this, which is a mission statement. Similar to the exercise with Mad Libs, this can be really good. This is usually internal facing only, but it's a way to lay out what your values are, what your goals are, what your mission is here, which can actually work wonders with getting investors to align with that mission and get excited about your company. So, these guys talk about the heritage of, where they are in Massachusetts, 250 years. They talk about Boston Strong, that plays on current events. It plays on the heartstrings a little bit, and it focuses on local. It makes it clear that this is cultivation first. So I think they do a pretty good job of explaining what their mission is. And now breaking into it, this is their corporate structure. This one matters for these guys because they're a little bit farther along. Generally, you don't need to show a lot of the complex structure of if you have like a holding company or anything like that. That's just going to be a distraction during early stage fundraising. These guys, knocked it out of the park with high res images. Another immediate way to turn off investors, if you use just crappy clip art, you're using, even if you're using partner logos, don't get these logos directly from the partner. Don't just Google the name of the partner and pull a logo from the first Google Images results. You want a high-res vector image that will actually look integrated onto the page when you're featuring them. But obviously, an actual real-world example of one of their stores. It's got humans on it. Builds a little bit of that trust and connection. These guys jump into milestones because they have, like I said, a little bit more progress here. This is what I love seeing on a team slide. I usually like to see human faces as well, if you can get them. If you do, make sure that they're consistent. There's nothing worse than when you get to a team slide and your CTO is a black and white photo, your CFO is clearly its passport pic, your CEO he's wearing a suit because he's at his wedding. You want it to all feel, like I said, integrated. So meet with your team, get in front of the same wall, the same brick background, take the same photo from the same angle so it feels like this was all done at the same time. It's these small psychological steps which can actually end up making a big difference. But these guys knocked it out of the park because they're logos. As mentioned, investors sometimes only spend 6 or 7 seconds on each slide. A logo, you can piggyback off of the positive brand recognition these people already have, stop them in their tracks, and get them to think, oh, shoot, well, if this person was at, AWH, oh, I know AWH. I invested in them. I know one of their operators. I can go to them and ask, how are these guys? Do you know them? Do you work with them? How was he as a CEO? Is he somebody who could be a good fit to spin up this new venture? So logos, not just of past places you've worked, but sometimes associations you're a part of, like NCIA or the DCR. It can be alma mater. Like if you're pitching a group of investors from University of Michigan and your team is a bunch of people from U of M, you damn well better believe you want U of M's logo on there. Even if you're pitching an investor, at a firm who might have gone to that university, that's another thing you can slip in and get them to stop in their tracks. Next up here, this is a little bit of a breakdown on the management team. This is a really in-depth. I'm going to advise against this. Typically, you do not ever want to see big blocks of text like this. You don't want paragraphs, you want bullet points. You always want to look at everything on a page and ask yourself, does this add value? Will this stop somebody? Will this make them potentially want to invest in us? Will this answer a question they have? And if the answer is no, get it out of your deck. You want this thing to flow as seamlessly as possible. These guys, what they aren't doing well is storytelling. They're trying to overwhelm you by saying, we got a lot of traction, we've already got big logos, we've got huge heavy hitters who already work at this company. I'm an actor. This guy's been in a bunch of stuff. They're trying to kind of, wow you and then get into the specifics. Storytelling, which we'll see a little bit more of in some of these other decks, can look obviously a lot different. Rapidly expanding market. This is a great example of a market size slide. This is specific, of course, to Massachusetts. You should absolutely do one to reflect the opportunity in California and then LA. This is about regulatory. Some of that matters, but most of these investors are already going to be aware of regulatory hurdles if they've invested in that market before. Competitive advantage, these guys are leaning on strategic locations, like I said, delivery, and bringing manufacturing into a state that has a little bit of it, but nobody that's super large scale, at least not at the time this was drafted. And then, like I said, it's vertically integrated, so these guys aren't trying to reinvent the wheel. That always gives investors a lot of confidence. 100,000 feet of canopy, 112-acre farm, 11 cultivation and manufacturing. I mean, these guys clearly went very, very big, but this doesn't guarantee success. I mean, how many large operators, have we lost in the past year? Now that raised millions. So a little bit more on some of their key partnerships, key relationships. Here's actual photos of the store, of the brand. This builds personal connection with what you're doing. It makes it real. It makes it tangible. So it is worth investing in. Even merch, swag, make them feel that this is something that's full circle, that's community. It's something that is already seeing a strong response from locals. It isn't just, aspirational. Much more in depth on the store. All of this stuff is key content if you have this. Obviously, it's tough when you're still early stage to have, production ready photos. But if you can prioritize that, it's worth doing. But overall, as you can see, an incredibly long deck that looks very pretty, but does definitely have its flaws.